The glass slipped from my hand before I could catch it, not because I was startled, not because my grip had weakened with age. I let it fall deliberately, because in that moment, standing just outside the screen door of the lake house, listening to my son's voice carry through the mesh, I needed something to do with my hands other than push through that door and say something I couldn't take back. The glass hit the wooden deck and bounced. Didn't break, just rolled to the edge and stopped against the railing, like it had decided to think things over before going any further. I wished I could do the same. Inside, my son was on the phone, his voice low the way it gets when he doesn't want to be overheard. I'd stepped outside to get some air after dinner, the way I do most evenings now. The sun was going down over the lake, turning the water that particular shade of copper that my wife always said looked like a painting someone hadn't finished yet. This was her favorite place. We'd rented this same cabin every 4th of July for 22 years. After she died, I kept coming. I don't know if it was for her or for me. Maybe both. I hadn't meant to hear anything, but the screen door was thin, and the evening was quiet, and my son had clearly forgotten how sound carries across still water and old wood. "The evaluation's the right move," he said. "Once that's on record, the rest follows naturally. Dad's not. He's not the same as he was. I'm telling you." The sale rattled him. He doesn't understand what he has. I stood very still. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said, his voice taking on that defensive edge I'd heard 1,000 times since he was 17. "I'm protecting him. Someone has to." I picked up the glass from the deck. I walked back inside through the front door, the long way around, so he wouldn't see me. I said goodnight to my daughter, who was reading on the couch, and I went to my room, and I lay on top of the covers in the dark for a long time. I didn't sleep, but I didn't panic either. I thought, let me go back a little, to where this actually started, because the phone call wasn't the beginning. Looking back now, I can see the signs were there for months, maybe longer, and I miss them the way you miss a slow leak. You don't notice the water until you're already standing in it. I am 64 years old. I spent 37 years building a regional freight and logistics company from a single truck I bought used with a loan my father co-signed. At the peak, we were running 48 trucks across 6 states and employing just over 200 people. I knew most of them by name. I knew their kids' names. When the offer came in at $4.5 million, I didn't take it right away. I sat with it for 6 months, talked to my attorney, talked to my accountant, talked to the photograph of my wife on my desk, and then I signed. She'd been gone 2 years by then. I figured she would have told me to stop working so hard and go see something. I have 2 children. My daughter is 36 and lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband and their 2 kids. She's a pediatric occupational therapist, steady and smart, and she has her mother's habit of asking the question you weren't expecting. My son is 41. He lives 20 minutes from me in the same town we grew up in. He works in commercial real estate, which means he's done well in good years and struggled in bad ones. And there have been more bad ones lately than he lets on. After the sale, my son started calling more, stopping by more, offering to help with things I hadn't asked for help with. He sat with me while my financial advisor walked me through the wealth management plan, and he asked a lot of questions. Good questions. Detailed ones. The kind that take preparation. I remember feeling grateful at the time. I thought the sale had brought us closer. I thought he was maturing into the kind of son I'd always hoped for. I was 64 years old and I should have known better. The first sign I missed was small. We were at dinner in February, just the 2 of us, and he mentioned that a friend of his knew a geriatric care specialist. Just in conversation, just casually. The way you mention things. He said something about how a lot of people our age, he said, our age, even though he's 41, don't think about planning for cognitive changes until it's too late, and how it's really a gift to your family to get an assessment done early, as a baseline, just so everyone knows where things stand, he said. Proactive, not reactive. I nodded and changed the subject. I filed it away without knowing why. The second sign was in March, when he called my attorney's office. He told the receptionist he was my son and asked about scheduling a meeting to review Dad's estate documents. My attorney called me afterward, just to confirm, and I said I hadn't authorized that and wasn't planning to. My attorney said simply, "That's what I thought." Neither of us said anything more about it. The third sign came from my neighbor, a retired school teacher who has lived next door for 30 years. She mentioned, gently, that my son had stopped by while I was out of town visiting my daughter and had asked her whether she'd noticed me seeming confused lately or having trouble with day-to-day things. She'd told him she didn't know what he was talking about. She told me because she thought I should know. I thanked her and said I'd look into it. I added it to the pile. Then came the 4th of July and the lake house in Vermont and the phone call through the screen door, and the pile became too heavy to carry any further. Here is what I decided, lying on that bed in the dark. I was not going to say anything. Not yet. Not until I understood the full picture. I had built a company from nothing by being patient when other people got emotional, and by watching carefully when other people talked too much. I was going to apply those same skills to my own family, which was a terrible thing to have to do, but which seemed, at that moment, to be the only reasonable option. The next morning I was the first one up. I made coffee and sat on the deck and watched a heron stand motionless at the edge of the water for 20 minutes before deciding to move. My daughter came out around 7 with her own mug and sat across from me, and we watched the heron together in silence, and I thought about how she had her mother's patience and her mother's eyes and her mother's way of not filling quiet with noise. "You seem tired," she said eventually. "Didn't sleep well." She looked at me for a moment. "Is everything okay?" I almost told her then. I came very close, but I needed one more day. I needed to watch my son, to listen, to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I brought her into it. Because once I told her, it would stop being something I could control quietly, and I wasn't ready to lose control of it yet. "Old age," I said. "Go figure." She made a face that said she didn't entirely believe me, but she let it go. That's also something she got from her mother. My son came down at 9, bright and easy the way he gets when he's decided something. He made eggs and talked about the boat rental and asked if I wanted to try fishing in the afternoon, the way I used to do with both of them when they were kids. It was a good performance. I ate my eggs and listened to him and thought about the word evaluation and what it meant in the context of $4.5 million and a conservatorship filing. In the state where I live, a conservatorship gives a court-appointed person control over another person's finances and property when a judge has determined that person can no longer manage their own affairs. It is a legal process designed to protect vulnerable people. It is also, when wielded by someone with an agenda, one of the most effective tools for financial theft that exists inside the bounds of the law. I know this because I spent 2 hours on my phone that afternoon, while my son and daughter were out on the rental boat, and I had told them I wanted to rest, reading everything I could find. I also called my attorney, not his assistant, my attorney directly, on his cell, and I laid out what I'd heard and what I'd been piecing together for months. My attorney was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then he said, "How long do you want to wait before we move?" 2 weeks, I said. "Maybe 3. What are you waiting for?" "Evidence," I said. "And I want to see how far he'll go." There was another pause. "You understand that if he actually files, he won't file," I said. "He's not ready to file. He's still building the case. He needs the evaluation first." My attorney said he would start drafting some documents on his end. Quietly, nothing filed yet, just ready. I went back to the deck and watched the boat come back across the water, my daughter's arm trailing in the wake, my son laughing at something, the sun catching the water the same way it had for every one of those 22 summers, and I tried to remember the last time I'd simply been happy in a moment without it costing me something. I thought of my wife. I thought of how she used to say that the most dangerous thing about grief was how it made you grateful for whatever warmth you could find, even warmth that wasn't real. She was talking about something else at the time, but she had a way of saying things that applied to more than one situation. That evening, while my son was in the shower, I sat with my daughter in the kitchen and I told her everything. I watched her face move through the things I expected: disbelief, then recognition, then a slow and quiet anger that she pressed down without effort because she is her mother's daughter. And then I watched her sit back and look at the wall for a moment, the way she does when she's processing. How long? She asked. Months, I said. Probably longer. And you didn't tell me. I'm telling you now. She looked at me. What do you need from me? This is why I told her when I did. Not for comfort. Not to watch her be angry on my behalf. Because I knew. When I finally got to the part where I needed another set of eyes and ears, and someone I could trust completely, she would ask exactly that question and nothing else. I told her what I needed. For the rest of the trip, she was brilliant. Warm and natural with her brother, laughing at his jokes, asking about his work, giving him no indication that anything had shifted. I watched her do it, and I thought about what it costs a person to be that composed, and I felt something that was close to guilt, but wasn't quite, because I hadn't built this situation, and I hadn't asked for it, but I had handed it to her to carry, and that was mine to own. On the last morning, my son brought up the evaluation again. He did it gently, over breakfast, framing it as something he'd been reading about, as though the idea had just occurred to him. He said he'd found a specialist in our area, that a lot of successful people were doing it now as part of their retirement planning, that it was just a baseline. I looked at him across the table. I said, "That's not a bad idea. Let me think about it." The relief on his face was so immediate and so total that I had to look away, not because I felt sorry for him, but because I felt something older and sadder than sorry, something I didn't have a name for yet. We drove home 2 days later. My daughter called me that night from Portland, and we went through the plan in detail. I called my attorney the next morning. I called my financial advisor the afternoon after that, and then I waited. Which, as it turns out, is harder when you know what you're waiting for. My son moved quickly once he thought he had my agreement. The specialist he'd found was a licensed neuropsychologist. Her intake paperwork was standard. What wasn't standard was that my son had already spoken to her office before I had, as I learned from my own attorney, who had a contact at the state medical licensing board, and who knew how to ask the right questions without raising flags. The appointment was being positioned as a family-initiated cognitive evaluation, with my son listed as the coordinating family member. The documentation, if the evaluation came back with anything usable, would have been incorporated into a guardianship petition within 30 days. I had the appointment. I answered every question. I scored in the 91st percentile for my age group across all categories. The neuropsychologist, to her credit, told my son in his follow-up call that she couldn't support a guardianship claim and she wouldn't be providing documentation for one. By the time that call happened, I had already signed the papers my attorney had prepared. Let me tell you what those papers said. The $4.5 million, minus taxes and fees, had been sitting in a managed account since the sale. I moved it into an irrevocable trust that same week, with my daughter named as the sole trustee. The terms of the trust specify exactly how distributions are made, to whom, and under what circumstances. It cannot be challenged by a conservatorship petition. It cannot be touched by a guardianship filing. It does not pass through my estate at death. It operates independently of my will, which means it is also protected from any challenges made to my will. My son is not named in the trust. My son is not named in the updated will. My son is not listed as a beneficiary on any account, policy, or property that I own. This sounds harsh when I write it plainly. I am aware of that. I want to be honest about the fact that it did not feel good to do it. It felt like the kind of thing you do not come back from. And I knew that going in. And I did it anyway. Because when someone tells a near stranger that your father is showing signs of dementia, when you know that isn't true, when someone calls your attorney's office without your knowledge, when someone builds a legal case designed to strip you of control over the life you built with, in your own hands, you do not owe that person a second chance before you protect yourself. I called my son 3 weeks after I got home from Vermont. I asked him to come for dinner. He came, and he sat across from me at the same table we'd sat at my entire life, and I watched him look comfortable, which told me the neuropsychologist hadn't told him about the percentile scores yet, or if she had, he'd convinced himself it wasn't over. I let him eat. I let him talk about work and about a deal he was trying to close and about a trip he was thinking of taking. And then I set a folder on the table and I told him, in the quietest voice I had, that I knew not everything. I told him what I knew, and I let him figure out what that meant. He tried 3 things in sequence. First, he denied it. Then he explained it. He said he was worried about me, genuinely worried, that the sale had changed me, and he didn't know how to reach me anymore. Then he apologized, and the apology was real, in the way that apologies are real when someone is sorry they got caught, and they understand the consequences are serious. He cried. I hadn't seen him cry since his mother's funeral, and it undid me slightly, the way it always does when a person's grief is real, even if the thing surrounding it isn't. I did not soften. I want to be clear about that. I sat with his crying the way I'd sat with his mother's illness, not unmoved, but clear. There is a difference between feeling something and letting that feeling change what you know. I told him that the trust had been signed and funded. I told him the will had been updated. I told him that if he chose to contest either one, he would be doing so against documentation of what I'd uncovered, which my attorney held, and which would become part of any public record created by a legal challenge. I told him I loved him. I told him that was not the same as trusting him. I told him I didn't know what had happened to the person who used to go fishing with me on this lake, whether it was the years or the money or the bad deals or some older wound I never managed to see, but that whatever it wasn't my job to solve it by handing him control of my life. He left before 9. He didn't slam the door. My daughter flew in the following weekend. We took a walk around the neighborhood the way her mother and I used to, long enough that we didn't have to rush anything. She asked me how I was feeling, and I said something I hadn't expected to say until it came out. I said I felt like I'd been handed my life back. She took my arm the way her mother used to, and we walked the rest of the block without talking. And the evening was cool and the street was quiet. And I thought about the 37 years of early mornings and late nights and one truck and alone and everything it had eventually become. And I thought about how none of that was the real thing. The company was the proof of the work. The money was the result of the proof. But neither of those was the thing itself. The thing itself was this: the walk. I think about the heron sometimes. The one at the edge of the lake on the morning after I heard the phone call. 20 minutes without moving. I don't think it was waiting for something to come to it. I think it was deciding how to move next, understanding where the water was deep and where it was shallow, watching before it committed. It got what it went for in the end. I retired from my company because I thought I was done building. I understand now that what I was actually done with was the first thing. And the second thing, whatever this part is, the part with the walks and the trust documents, and the quiet evenings, and the learning to tell the difference between warmth that's real and warmth that wants something, is just beginning. I spent 37 years building something I could hand to other people. I think I've spent the last several months learning what I'm not willing to hand over at all. My wife would have seen my son's plan coming. She had a way of reading the underside of things, the motivation beneath the motion, and she would have taken me aside sometime in February and told me to pay attention. I miss her judgment almost as much as I miss her, some days more. But here is the thing about losing someone who knew you completely. You don't just lose the person. You lose the version of yourself that only existed when they were watching. And then you have to figure out, slowly, in the dark, in the quiet, over lake water and cold coffee and documents you never wanted to sign, who you are without the witness. I am 64 years old. I am not confused. I am not diminished. I have 37 years of early mornings in my hands and 4.5 million reasons to know exactly what I'm worth and what I'm not willing to give away. My daughter called last Tuesday and asked if I wanted to come to Portland for Thanksgiving. She said the kids wanted to see me, and her husband was going to attempt to deep fry a turkey, and she needed someone sensible in the house. I said I'd be there. I've been sleeping better lately. I don't know if that means I've resolved something or just postponed it, but there is a version of the rest of my life that I can now imagine clearly, and the heron is in it, and the walk is in it, and the quiet evenings are in it, and the people who are in it are people who never once looked at me and saw a problem to be managed. That's not nothing. That's not nothing at all. If you're watching this and you've been through something like it, or you're watching someone you love go through something like it, here is the only advice I have. Not about the legal tools, though those matter. Not about the trust documents, Though get those done, please. For your own sake, and for the people who depend on you to have your affairs in order. The advice is simpler than that. Pay attention to what people do when they think you're not looking. Not because you should expect betrayal, but because people who love you don't change when the audience disappears. The love doesn't go somewhere else when you leave the room. If it goes somewhere else when you leave the room, it was never love. I dropped that glass on purpose, and I'm glad I did. Some things need to fall before you can see clearly.